Captain Minho Park stood on the bridge of his ship, looking out at the beautiful blue planet below. 3 years had passed since humans first met the Valorans, and every visit to their world still amazed him. The planet Luxaria looked like a giant jewel floating in space with crystal cities that caught starlight and threw it back in rainbow colors. "Captain, we're getting the welcome signal," said his communications officer. The message came through in perfect Korean, though it was spoken by an alien who had learned their language just to be friendly. "This is Speaker Jiwon Lee of the Valoran Council. Welcome back to Luxaria, friends from Earth. We are happy to see the Soul's promise again." Minho smiled. Jiwon had picked a Korean name after learning their language. She said it sounded beautiful to her, even though her real name was a series of musical tones that humans could barely hear. That was just like the Valorans, always trying to make others comfortable. "Permission to land granted, Captain Park," Jiwon continued. "The docking bay is ready for your supply ships." The Soul's Promise was one of 12 human ships that regularly brought supplies to Luxaria. In return, the Valorans shared their amazing energy technology. It was a trade that helped both species, but more than that, it had become a real friendship. As the ship landed, Minho could see crowds of Valorans waiting to greet them. The aliens looked like walking crystals, about the same height as humans but made of what seemed like living glass. They changed colors based on their emotions. Right now they were all glowing warm yellow and orange, which meant they were happy and excited. "Captain, you should see this," called out his science officer Tae-hyun Kim. The young engineer was practically bouncing with excitement. "The Valorans have been working on something amazing. They want to show us their new energy storage system." Tae-hyun had become obsessed with Valoran technology. He spent every visit learning from their scientists, and they seemed to enjoy his enthusiasm. Unlike most other alien species that humans had met through long-distance communications, the Valorans actually liked human creativity and curiosity. Most aliens thought humans were too emotional, too unpredictable, too chaotic. The Galactic Council, which ruled most of the known galaxy, had made it clear that they considered humans to be barely civilized. They allowed Earth to exist, but warned that humans should stay in their own solar system and not bother the advanced species. The Valorans were different. They found human emotions fascinating instead of frightening. They loved human art, music, and stories. When humans offered to help them develop defense systems, the Valorans had been grateful instead of insulted. As Minho walked through the crystal streets of the Valoran capital, he remembered his first visit here. The Valorans had no weapons, no military, no concept of war. They had lived in peace for thousands of years, protected by their remote location and the fact that they had nothing other species wanted to steal. But the galaxy was changing. Pirates and raiders were becoming bolder. Some species were expanding their territory by force. The peaceful Valorans had started to worry about their safety, and that's when humans had offered to help. "Minho," called a familiar voice. Speaker Jiwon Lee approached, her crystal body shifting to a warm gold color. That meant deep friendship. "How are things on Earth? Did you bring news from home?" "All good news," Minho replied. "Our governments have approved the new trade agreements. We can increase the supply runs to twice a month, and we're sending more technical advisors." Jiwon's colors brightened even more. "Wonderful. Our people are so excited to learn more about human engineering. Your ideas are so different from ours. Where we see problems, you see puzzles to solve." They walked together toward the main laboratory complex, where Taehyun was already deep in conversation with a group of Valoran scientists. The young engineer was gesturing wildly as he explained some concept, while the aliens pulsed with colors that showed their fascination. "Your Taehyun has given us so many new ideas," Jiwon said. "We never thought to combine our energy manipulation with your mechanical systems. The possibilities are endless, but not everyone was happy about the human Valoran friendship." Ambassador Hiram Choi had been sending worried reports back to Earth. The Galactic Council was asking more and more questions about human activities. They wanted to know why humans were interfering with Valoran development. The Council claimed they were concerned about contamination of Valoran culture. But humans suspected the real reason was jealousy. For the first time in centuries, a species was advancing rapidly by working with someone the Council didn't control. "Have there been any more messages from the Council?" Minho asked Jiwan as they entered the lab. Jiwan's colors shifted to a worried blue-green. "3 more this week. They keep demanding that we stop sharing technology with humans. They say we're violating some ancient law about technological development." "What did you tell them?" "The same thing we always tell them. The Valorans choose our own friends. We're not breaking any laws by learning from humans or teaching humans about our energy systems." In the lab, Taehyun was examining a device that looked like a crystal flower. "Captain, you have to see this," he called out excitedly. "They've figured out how to store human-style electrical energy in their crystal matrices. This could revolutionize space travel." The Valoran scientist working with him, whose name sounded like wind chimes, pulsed with pride. "Taehyun showed us how to think about energy storage differently. Instead of just holding energy, we learned to make it grow and change." It was amazing what the two species could accomplish together. Humans brought creativity, determination, and mechanical skills. Valorans brought patience, precision, and their natural ability to manipulate energy. The combination was producing innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. But their success was making enemies. Later, that day, as Minho was preparing to return to his ship, an urgent message came through on the emergency channel. "This is Admiral Seokjin Yu calling all human vessels in Valoran space. We have a situation developing. Long-range sensors are detecting a large fleet approaching Luke's area. The ships match Galactic Council signatures." Minho felt his blood turn cold. "How large a fleet?" "At least 50 ships, Captain. Maybe more. They're not responding to our communication attempts." Jiwan was standing nearby and had heard the transmission. Her crystal body had turned a deep red color, the Valoran sign of fear and alarm. "Why would they send so many ships here?" she asked. "We haven't done anything wrong." But Minho had a terrible feeling that he knew exactly why the Council was coming. They had finally decided that the human-Valoran friendship had gone too far. The question was, what did they plan to do about it? "Jiwan, you should contact your government," Minho said quietly. "Tell them to prepare for trouble. I don't think this is going to be a friendly visit." As alarms began to sound across Luke's area, Minho realized that everything was about to change. The peaceful days of trade and friendship were ending. Something much darker was beginning. The Galactic Council fleet arrived at Luke's area like a storm of metal and anger. 73 warships surrounded the peaceful planet, their weapons pointed down at the crystal cities below. Ambassador Harim Choi worked desperately from her ship, trying to open communication channels with the Council commanders. "This is Ambassador Choi representing Earth's diplomatic mission," she transmitted on all frequencies. "Please respond. We need to discuss whatever concerns you have about our presence here." The only answer was silence. Admiral Seokjin Yu commanded the small human defense fleet, just 8 ships that had been stationed around Luke's area to protect the trade routes. He knew his tiny force couldn't stand against the massive Council armada, but he positioned his ships between the enemy fleet and the planet anyway. "All human vessels, this is Admiral Yu," he broadcast to his captains. "We're outnumbered 10 to 1, but we're not running. Our friends are down there." On the planet's surface, Speaker Ji-Wan Lee was in emergency session with the Valoran Council. Her crystal body flickered between colors as she tried to understand what was happening. The Valorans had never experienced anything like this. War was not part of their nature. "Perhaps we should ask our human friends to leave," suggested one of the council members, his crystal form pulsing with nervous yellow light. "If we're no longer associated with humans, maybe the Galactic Council will go away." "No," Jiwan said firmly, her colors shifting to determined orange. "Humans are our friends. They helped us when we needed help. We don't abandon friends just because someone threatens us." In the orbital research station above Luxaria, engineer Taehyun Kim was working frantically with his Valoran colleagues. They had been testing a new type of engine that combined human mechanical systems with Valoran energy manipulation. Now he was trying to get their experimental ship ready for whatever was coming. "Taehyun, look at this." called one of the Valoran scientists. The alien's form was flashing rapid red patterns, the sign of extreme fear. The Council ships are charging their weapons, but these aren't normal weapons. Taehyun looked at the energy readings and felt sick. The Council ships were powering up weapons specifically designed to destroy crystal-based life forms. They weren't planning to capture or relocate the Valorans. They were planning to kill them all. "We have to warn everyone," Taehyun shouted, running toward the communication array. But it was too late. Without any warning, without any declaration of war, without even a demand for surrender, the Galactic Council opened fire. The weapons they used were unlike anything humans had ever seen. Beams of sickly green energy struck the crystal cities below. Where the beams touched, Valoran buildings simply dissolved, and any Valoran caught in the energy streams began to break apart at the molecular level. "No!" Admiral Seokjin screamed, as he watched the slaughter begin. "All ships, attack! Stop them!" His 8 human vessels charged at the Council fleet, their small weapons firing desperately. They managed to damage a few enemy ships before the return fire began. 3 human ships exploded immediately. The remaining 5 kept fighting even, as their hulls cracked and their crews died. On the planet, Ji-won Lee was in her council chamber when the first energy beam struck the building next to theirs. She watched in horror as her people simply ceased to exist, their crystal bodies dissolving into sparkling dust. "Emergency broadcast to all human ships," she transmitted, her voice somehow staying calm even as her world ended around her. "This is Speaker Ji-won Lee. The Council is using biological weapons designed specifically for our species. They mean to kill us all." Another beam struck closer. The walls of the Council chamber began to crack and glow. "Tell the humans," Ji-won continued. "Tell them that we were honored to be their friends. Tell them that knowing humans taught us what courage truly means. Tell them—" The energy beam hit the Council chamber directly. Ji-won's transmission cut to static. From his research station, Taehyun watched the systematic destruction of everything he had come to love about Luxaria. The crystal cities that had sparkled like jewels were now piles of dust. The Valoran scientists who had become his closest friends were gone. The beautiful blue planet was turning gray as the Council's weapons swept across every continent. "All life signs are negative," reported one of the Council ships with cold satisfaction. "The Valoran species has been successfully terminated. Operation Clean Sweep is complete." Taehyun felt something break inside his chest. These weren't just statistics. These were people he knew. Ji-won, who had learned Korean just to make humans feel welcome. The scientist who had spent weeks teaching him about energy matrices. The children who had played in the crystal gardens and learned to sing human songs. All of them were dead. With tears streaming down his face, Taehyun activated the experimental ship's engines. The hybrid human-Valoran drive system roared to life, and he fled toward Earth carrying the recordings of what had happened. Admiral Seokjin's flagship was the last human ship still fighting. His vessel was badly damaged. Most of his crew was dead and his weapons were almost empty, but he kept firing at the Council ships until his final torpedo was launched. "This is Admiral Yu to any surviving human vessels," he transmitted as his ship began to break apart. "Get home. Tell Earth what happened here. Tell them the Council murdered an entire species just for being our friends." His ship exploded in a flash of white light. The Council fleet commander sent a message to all remaining human ships in the area. "Let this be a lesson. Any species that allies with humans will share the Valorans' fate. Humans are a disease that must be contained. Return to your home system and never leave it again, or we will do to Earth what we have done here." The few surviving human ships limped back toward Earth, carrying the terrible news. Taehyun's experimental vessel was the fastest, arriving first at the Sol system's outer defenses. "This is Taehyun Kim requesting immediate emergency conference with Earth Command," he transmitted, his voice hollow with grief and shock. "Luxaria is gone. The Valorans are extinct. The Council killed them all." The news hit Earth like a physical blow. President Myeon-han called an emergency session of the World Assembly. Representatives from every nation gathered to watch the recordings that Taehyun had brought back. The chamber fell silent as they watched the green energy beams sweep across Luxaria. They watched Valoran cities dissolve. They heard Jiwon's final transmission. They saw an entire species wiped out in less than 6 hours, killed for no crime except friendship with humans. When the recordings ended, President Han stood slowly. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with something that made the entire assembly lean back in their chairs. "They wanted to send us a message," she said quietly. "They wanted to show us what happens to species that befriend humans. They wanted us to be afraid." She paused, looking around the room at the representatives of humanity. "But they've made a mistake. They thought fear would make us weak. They thought we would crawl back to our solar system and hide." Her voice began to rise. "They don't understand humans at all. They don't know that when you hurt our friends, you don't make us afraid. You make us angry. And they're about to learn exactly what angry humans are capable of." The assembly erupted in agreement. From every corner of Earth, the same message was being sent. The Valorans would be avenged. Taehyun sat alone in his quarters holding a small crystal fragment, all that remained of his Valoran friends. He whispered a promise to the memory of Jiwon and all the others who had died. The Galactic Council thought they had ended the human-Valoran alliance with their massacre. Instead, they had just begun something much worse for themselves. They had awakened humanity's fury, and that fury would burn across the galaxy until justice was done. The war was coming. Earth changed overnight. The peaceful blue planet that had been focused on exploration and trade suddenly became a fortress preparing for war. Every factory, every shipyard, every laboratory was converted to military production. The massacre at Luxaria had awakened something primal in humanity, something the Galactic Council was about to regret. Dr. Do-Yun Jung stood in his new laboratory deep beneath the Swiss mountains. Around him, the brightest minds from every nation worked on Project Retribution. Their mission was simple: create weapons that would make the galaxy's oldest and most powerful alliance pay for their crimes. "The Council thinks they know us," Do-Hyun told his team of scientists and engineers. "They think humans are just another species that can be bullied into submission. They're wrong." On the main display screen, footage from Luxaria played on repeat. The green energy beams, the dissolving crystal cities, the systematic murder of an entire peaceful species. Every person in the lab had watched these recordings hundreds of times, and each viewing made them more determined. "What makes humans different?" Do-Hyun continued. "We adapt. We improvise. We refuse to accept that something is impossible just because no one has done it before. The Council has ruled the galaxy for millions of years using the same tactics, the same weapons, the same strategies. They've never faced an enemy that doesn't follow the rules." Captain Soman Kang was leading one of the most unusual projects in human history. Her team was building ships that were designed to be unpredictable, vessels that could change their tactics in the middle of battle, weapons that would malfunction in ways that somehow made them more effective, and defense systems that worked by embracing chaos instead of fighting it. "The Council expects logical, predictable warfare," Somin explained to her engineers. "They expect enemies to follow established patterns. So we're going to do exactly the opposite." Her flagship project was the Ghost Ship program. These vessels used quantum uncertainty principles to become literally unpredictable. Their location, their speed, even their existence became probability clouds that enemy sensors couldn't track. "If they can't predict where we are or what we're going to do next," Somin said with a grim smile, "how can they fight us?" Meanwhile, Taehyun Kim worked in a special laboratory surrounded by crystal fragments from Luxaria. He was the only human who truly understood the hybrid technology that had been developed through the human-Valoran partnership. Now he was weaponizing that knowledge. "The Valorans taught us to think about energy differently," he told President Myeon-han during one of her visits. "They showed us how to make energy respond to emotion, to thought, to will. What if we could build engines that run on human anger?" The result was the Fury Drive system. These engines converted human emotional energy into raw power. The angrier a ship's crew became, the faster and stronger their vessel would be. It was technology that only humans could use because only humans could channel their emotions into focused rage. Every ship will carry crystal fragments from Luxaria, Taehyun explained. Every crew member will remember what the Council did to our friends, and that memory will make them unstoppable. Intelligence Officer Jiho Ryu was studying everything humanity knew about the Galactic Council. What he discovered gave him hope for the first time since Luxaria fell. They're old, he reported to the military command. Not just their individual members, but their entire way of thinking. They've been using the same military strategies for thousands of years. They've never had to adapt because they've never faced serious resistance. The Council's strength was also their weakness. They were so used to being the strongest force in the galaxy that they had become complacent. Their ships were powerful but predictable. Their tactics were effective but inflexible. They had never learned to deal with an enemy that refused to follow the established rules of galactic warfare. More importantly, Jiho continued, they've made enemies everywhere. Half the galaxy hates them, but they've never dared to rebel because the Council seemed too powerful to defeat. If we can prove that the Council can be beaten. While Earth prepared for war, the Council sent probe fleets to monitor humanity's home system. They expected to find a species cowering in fear, begging for mercy, offering tribute in exchange for being allowed to survive. Instead, they found nothing. Human technology, inspired by Valoran light manipulation techniques, had hidden the entire military buildup. The probe ships reported that Earth seemed to be developing normally, with no sign of military preparation. The Council was satisfied. The humans had learned their lesson. They were completely wrong. Fleet Commander Seok Jin Yu, promoted after Admiral Seok Jin Yu's heroic death at Luxaria, stood on the bridge of his new flagship. Around him, 50,000 human vessels waited in the darkness between stars. Every ship carried volunteers who had asked for only one thing, the chance to avenge the Valorans. Status report, Seok Jin commanded. All ships report ready for operation. His tactical officer replied. Fury drives are charged and responding well to crew emotional levels. Ghost ship squadrons are showing optimal quantum uncertainty patterns. Weapon systems are armed and eager. Each human ship carried a fragment of crystal from Luxaria. Each crew member had watched the recordings of the massacre. Each person aboard the fleet had made the same promise. For every Valoran life taken, they would claim a Council world. The fleet represented everything that made humanity unique. Ships that repaired themselves by learning from damage. Weapons that became more accurate the more desperate their operators became. Tactics that were deliberately designed to make no sense to logical military minds. Communications. Open a channel. To all ships, Seokjin ordered. 50,000 ship captains listened as their commander spoke. 3 months ago, our friends on Luxaria were murdered for the crime of friendship with humans. The Council thought that slaughter would teach us to be afraid. They thought we would hide in our home system and never again dare to make friends among the stars. His voice grew harder. They were wrong. Today we begin to show them what humans do when our friends are murdered. We don't hide. We don't surrender. We don't forgive. On every ship, crew members touched the crystal fragments they carried. They remembered Jiwon's voice, speaking Korean with careful pronunciation. They remembered the children singing human songs in their crystal gardens. They remembered an entire species that had welcomed humanity with open arms and paid for that friendship with their lives. The Council has ruled through fear for millions of years, Seokjin continued. Today, they learn what fear really means. Today they discover why humans are the most dangerous friends anyone could ever have. The fleet began to move. Ships disappearing into hyperspace using Fury drives powered by collective human rage. They were heading for 50 different Council worlds simultaneously, carrying weapons that defied logic and tactics that no military academy had ever taught. Behind them, Earth continued its preparations. More fleets were being built. More impossible weapons were being developed. More plans that made no sense to anyone except humans were being finalized. The Galactic Council had wanted to see what humans were truly capable of when pushed to their limits. They were about to find out, and they were going to regret asking the question. The war began everywhere at once. Across 50 Council worlds, human fleets appeared without warning. Not in the predictable patterns that galactic military doctrine suggested, but in ways that made no tactical sense. Ships emerged from hyperspace inside asteroid fields, behind moons, even within the gravity wells of gas giants where no sane pilot would risk their vessel. Captain Soman Kang led the assault on the Council's primary shipyard at Carador Prime. Her ghost ships materialized inside the facility's energy shields by calculating probability paths that shouldn't have existed according to known physics. Impossible, the Carador defense commander transmitted as alarms screamed across his command center. Ships cannot phase through our barriers. Tell that to the ships, Soman replied grimly as her vessels opened fire. The ghost ships didn't behave like normal warships. They flickered in and out of existence, their quantum uncertainty engines making them impossible to target consistently. When Council weapons fired at them, the shots passed through empty space where the ships had been a microsecond before. But the human weapons always found their targets. The shipyard that had built Council warships for 3,000 years was destroyed in 17 minutes. As explosions lit up the system, Soman's fleet vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only wreckage and confusion. On 49 other worlds, similar scenes played out. Human ships that repaired themselves by evolving new armor, configurations, weapons that deliberately malfunctioned in ways that made them more devastating, battle tactics that changed in the middle of engagements as human commanders followed their instincts instead of established doctrine. Captain Tae-hyun Kim commanded the experimental vessel Valoran's Vengeance, a ship that perfectly combined human engineering with the energy manipulation technology his alien friends had taught him. His vessel had become a legend among the human fleet, appearing from nowhere to destroy Council installations, then vanishing like an avenging spirit. Target acquired, his weapons officer reported as they approached a Council military base. Their shields are at maximum power. Good, Tae-hyun said quietly. That just makes them better conductors. He activated the Valoran energy systems, turning the enemy's own shields into weapons. The defensive barriers that should have protected the base instead became channels for devastating feedback that tore the facility apart from within. As the base exploded, Tae-hyun touched the crystal fragment mounted on his command chair, a piece of Luxaria that he carried everywhere. That's for Jiwon, he whispered. But the Council's greatest shock came when they tried to use their ultimate weapon against Earth. The planet killer had been their final guarantee of supremacy, a weapon capable of destroying entire worlds from across a star system. Intelligence officer Jiho Ryu and his team had been waiting for this moment. Using captured Council ships and uniforms, they had infiltrated the weapons control facility months earlier. Initiating firing sequence, the Council weapon commander announced, completely unaware that half his crew had been replaced by human agents. Firing sequence confirmed, Jiho replied from his position at the targeting console. But instead of aiming at Earth, he redirected the weapon toward the Council's capital system. The planet killer fired exactly as designed. The massive energy beam crossed space at the speed of light, carrying enough destructive force to crack a world in half. It struck the Council's primary government world 3 minutes later. The shockwave from the explosion destroyed 6 other planets in the same system and sent a message across the galaxy that was impossible to ignore. The Council was not invincible. But humanity's masterpiece was still to come. Dr. Do-hyun Jung had spent months developing what he called evolution mines, self-replicating weapons that learned from every engagement. They had been seeded throughout Council space for weeks, disguised as space debris and inactive asteroids. Now they activated simultaneously. The mines were designed on pure human principles. They adapted, they learned, and they became more dangerous with every battle. Each time Council forces destroyed one, the others learned from the engagement and developed countermeasures. At first, the Council military treated them as a minor nuisance. Standard mine-clearing procedures should have eliminated the threat quickly. But these mines didn't follow standard patterns. They studied the ships sent against them, analyzed the weapons used to destroy them, and shared that information with every other mine in the network. By the 10th engagement, they had learned to avoid Council weapons. By the 20th, they were actively hunting Council ships. "This is impossible," transmitted a Council admiral as his fleet retreated from what should have been a routine clearing operation. "Weapons cannot evolve this rapidly. They're not just weapons," Dr. Do-hyun explained to President Mi-yeon-han as they watched the mine network spread across Council territory. "They're artificial life forms programmed with human survival instincts. They learn because they have to learn. They adapt because adaptation is the only way to survive." The psychological effect was devastating. For millions of years, the Council had been the predators of the galaxy. Now they were being hunted by weapons that got smarter every time they were attacked. Council worlds that had never known fear suddenly found themselves under siege by enemies they couldn't understand or predict. Their ancient alliance began to crack as member species started questioning whether the Council was strong enough to protect them. Some species that had been enslaved for millennia saw humanity's success and began their own rebellions. The Keth threw off their chains and declared independence. The Morden attacked their Council overseers. The Veltar simply disappeared from their assigned worlds, leaving behind only a message. "We choose freedom." The galaxy was in chaos, and at the center of it all were humans who fought like nothing the universe had ever seen. Fleet Commander Seok Jin-yu received reports from across the war zone as he planned the next phase of operations. Every attack had succeeded beyond their best projections. Council forces were retreating on all fronts. Their military production had been cut by 60%. Their political alliance was collapsing. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the Council High Command. They're asking for surrender negotiations." The bridge fell silent. The Galactic Council, rulers of the galaxy for millions of years, wanted to surrender to humans who had been in space for less than a century. Seok-jin looked at the crystal fragment he carried, his own piece of Luxaria, his own memory of friends who had died for the crime of trusting humans. "Tell them," he said slowly, "that we'll consider their surrender. But first they're going to answer for what they did to the Valorans." Across the fleet, 50,000 ships received the news. The impossible had happened. Humanity had brought the mighty Galactic Council to its knees in 6 months of warfare. But the war wasn't over yet. Justice still needed to be served, and humans were very good at serving justice to those who hurt their friends. President Mi-yeon-han stood on the deck of her flagship as it approached the former capital world of the Galactic Council. The planet below was a burned ruin, its surface still glowing from the planet-killer weapon that humanity had turned against its builders. It seemed fitting that the Council's surrender would take place here, among the ashes of their own arrogance. The Council's remaining leaders waited in a damaged space station orbiting the dead world. Once this had been the center of galactic power, where ancient species decided the fate of younger civilizations. Now it was a broken shell, its gleaming halls dark and its proud banners torn. Mi-yeon walked through the station's corridors with her delegation. Every footstep echoed in the empty spaces where council members had once plotted and schemed. The few remaining leaders who had survived humanity's fury huddled in what had been their grand assembly chamber. "We surrender," spoke the senior council member, an ancient being whose species had ruled for 3 million years. "We offer complete surrender to humanity. Please stop the attacks." Mi-yeon studied the creature that had once commanded the deaths of entire species. Now it trembled before representatives of a world that had barely reached the stars. "Surrender is not enough," she said quietly. "You murdered the Valorans. You destroyed an entire peaceful species because they dared to be our friends. Surrender doesn't bring them back." Behind her stood the 12 surviving Valorans, led by Tae-hyun Kim, who had become their unofficial speaker. The crystal beings pulsed with sad blue light as they remembered their lost homeworld and their slaughtered people. "What do you want?" the council leader asked desperately. "Justice," Mi-yeon replied. "Complete dissolution of the Galactic Council, liberation of every species you've enslaved, trials for those responsible for genocide, and a new government based on cooperation instead of fear." The terms were not negotiable. The council had no choice but to accept. The ceremony that followed was broadcast across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched as the ancient Galactic Council formally dissolved itself and handed power to representatives of the species they had oppressed. Tae-hyun Kim, speaking for the Valoran survivors, accepted the Council's surrender. His words were simple but carried across every world. The Valorans believed in friendship and peace. They died because they trusted humans. Now humans have made sure that no one will ever again be murdered for choosing friendship over fear. Into his hands he held seeds from the crystal gardens of Luxaria, seeds that had somehow survived the genocide. He planted them in special soil taken from the former council homeworld, ensuring that Valoran life would bloom again on the world where their killers had been defeated. Fleet Commander Seokjin Yu became the first human ambassador to the new Galactic Federation. His flagship, renamed the Luxaria Memorial, traveled from world to world as a mobile embassy. Everywhere it went, species that had been silent for millennia found their voices again. "Freedom isn't something we can give you," Seokjin told the liberated species. "It's something you have to choose for yourselves. Humans will help protect that choice, but we won't make it for you." Dr. Do-hyun Jung led the new Federation's defense research programs. The weapons he developed were shared freely with any species that promised to protect others from oppression. His evolution minds became the foundation of a new type of defense system, one that learned and adapted to protect the weak from the strong. "Never again" became his motto, as he worked with scientists from dozens of worlds. Never again will the peaceful be slaughtered just because someone more powerful decides they're inconvenient. Captain Soman Kang took her ghost ships to explore the galaxy's outer rim, searching for species that the Council had marked for extinction. Her vessels became symbols of hope throughout the galaxy, ships that appeared wherever tyrants threatened the innocent. "We're not conquerors," she told the beings she rescued. "We're friends, and humans are very dangerous friends to have." The new Galactic Federation was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of ruling through fear, it operated through voluntary cooperation. Species joined because they wanted to, not because they were forced to. Technology was shared freely instead of hoarded by the powerful. Most importantly, the Federation's primary law was simple. No species would ever again be destroyed for choosing its own friends. 2 years after the Council's surrender, a memorial service was held on the rebuilt world of Luxaria. Using a combination of human engineering and energy manipulation techniques learned from the original Valorans, the crystal cities had been reconstructed exactly as they had been before the massacre. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered in the crystal gardens where Valoran children had once played. Each delegation planted a tree or flower from their homeworld, creating a garden that represented the diversity and friendship that the new galaxy celebrated. Tae-hyun Kim read the names of every Valoran who had died in the genocide. It took 6 hours to recite all 2.3 billion names, but no one left. The galaxy listened as the roll call of the dead honored those who had been murdered for the crime of friendship. When the ceremony ended, children from dozens of different species played, together in the crystal forests. They laughed and sang songs in languages their parents had thought were lost forever. They built friendships that crossed the barriers of biology and culture. President Mi On-han stood at the memorial center, where a single crystal fragment from the original Luxaria was mounted. Carved around it in every language spoken in the galaxy were the words that had become humanity's gift to the universe. They showed us friendship. We showed the galaxy fury. Now we show the universe what peace looks like when good people refuse to let evil prosper. The Galactic Council had ruled through fear for millions of years. They had created a galaxy where the strong dominated the weak, where species were destroyed for convenience, where friendship was seen as weakness. Humanity had changed all of that in less than 2 years of war. But the real victory wasn't in the battles won or the enemies defeated. The real victory was in the children playing in the crystal gardens, in the formerly enslaved species finding their voices again, in the knowledge that no peaceful civilization would ever again be destroyed just for choosing to trust humans. The Council had wanted to make an example of the Valorans. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They had shown the galaxy exactly what happened to anyone who hurt humanity's friends. And in doing so, they had created a universe where friendship was stronger than fear, where cooperation mattered more than conquest, and where beings like the Valorans could live in peace without worrying about the cost of trust. The Valorans were gone, but their dream of a galaxy built on friendship instead of fear had become reality, and humanity would make sure it stayed that way forever.